Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second interview of the 2025 Jesus and Politics Conference, Jesus Shall Reign. That is October 19th, Saturday, at Maple Grove Church in Topeka, Indiana, hosted by Syracuse Baptist Church and my dear friend, Jason Gingrich.
Children are hungry, my dog needs a bone. I'm out of a job now and I'm just driving home.
With me today is the irascible William Wolfe. How you doing?
Good, Tim. I actually think I'm pretty irascible, man. I'm
fairly irascible.
Yeah,
right.
Fairly irascible.
Right. Irreconcilable differences. No, it's reconcilable. No. You were here last year at the suggestion of John Harris. He just said, hey, you might want to reach out to this guy, and got to know each other, and even slept in our spare bedroom. Had a great time hanging out. And I wanted to have you back again. Obviously, your talk last year was so non-controversial. It just went under everyone's radar. No, who did you upset? What was the name of that group?
Right Wing Watch.
Yeah, right.
Right Wing Booster.
Exactly. Oh, they took such umbrage at your statement about possibly, maybe we're getting to the point, maybe where our founding fathers were back in 1775 and all. Oh, and yet they're the ones applauding the untrammeled immigration that's allowing Salvadorians to take over apartments in Aurora, Colorado. It's weird juxtaposition there. So we're in an election year, and
are we? I didn't notice.
Yeah, something about the POTUS. Now, remember, during Obama's year, it was the TOTUS, the teleprompter of the United States, which I kind of miss that. I don't miss his being the president, but I missed that website because it was pretty funny. Did you happen to see Kamala's interview on CNN?
I've only seen some clips of it, and from what I've seen, just it's embarrassing.
If I was an old, let's say an old Union Democrat, from the post-war pro-union, look out for the little man kind of paradigm, I would be like a Roman Catholic with Pope Francis. I'm like, no. They ask her a simple question. Day one, what do you do? Well, word salad. And I was surprised the interviewer immediately said, okay, back to day one. What would you do? And she still never answered the question. Of course she's not. So let's talk a little bit about Jesus and politics, because I know you as a bona fide evangelical Christian spent some time in the political world. Why don't you just give our viewers a little synopsis of your experience politically and how the Lordship of Christ would have been applied to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I think it's important for people to remember and know about me as much as they can is that I worked at the national level in politics. I worked for 3 different members of Congress in their congressional offices in Washington, D.C., doing a variety of different things. I was an intern at first, and then a legislative correspondent, which that's the person who answers constituent mail on behalf of the member of Congress. So I did that for 2 years from a member of Congress from North Carolina, Virginia Fox. She represents the western part of the state, kind of Appalachian University, Boone, North Carolina, and I'll tell you, Tim, reading angry constituent letters from the mountain folks in North Carolina for 2 years will do a number on you. It will radicalize you. And it did me. And this is like 2013, 2014.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the main topics back then, Tim, that people wrote in on was on immigration, trade policy, and ending foreign wars. And so, I mean, it's just like, I was sort of, and from North Carolina, that's a big thing for our state, the textile industry, the furniture manufacturing industry, the construction industry have all been seriously undermined by a combination of foreign trade policies, NAFTA, et cetera, and open border globalist immigration policies. And these are the people I grew up with. And so that's something that's been near and dear to my heart for over a decade. And then I got a chance to go and work for a guy named Dave Bratt, which he was a member of Congress from Virginia. Dave ran a campaign against the number 2 House Republican at the time in 2014, Eric Cantor, the majority leader.
Yeah.
He was an economics professor from Randolph-Macon. And what did David Bratt run on? He ran on pro-American trade policy and pro-American immigration policy, and he picked off the number 2 House Republican. So then I had the pleasure and the honor of serving in his office as a legislative assistant. So I wrote legislation. I gave him voting recommendations. I handled committee work for him, the House Education and Workforce Committee, when we did the reauthorization of sort of the federal policy on K through 12. And that gave me a real insight into the dysfunction of our federally funded, education programs.
Right.
But working for Fox and then for Dave Bratt, when Donald Trump went to run in 2015, man, I was ready for it. The pump had been primed. I was like, this is what the people want. And I was not at all surprised to see him go all the way. And I was an early supporter for Trump. It's interesting, Tim, thanks for giving me a chance to almost do a little apologetic for myself here.
Sure. Yeah.
People call me, these days, some of the most uncharitable elements on Twitter like to call me some sort of like Trump sycophant or, Trump bootlicker. But, people don't know that I have just genuinely been a policy oriented supporter of Donald Trump since 2015.
Yep.
And that combined with Tim watching closely how useless the GOP was at the national level, right? So especially in putting up any real opposition to Obama, we got this Tea Party wave that gave the House back to Republicans. We elect John Boehner as speaker. He does nothing. He turned out to be a total sellout. The Young Guns crowd, Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, one by one, all sellouts. And so it was I saw firsthand, especially at the national level, what an abysmal failure the GOP was doing in representing the interests of their base. And so I was not at all surprised when along came Donald Trump and he smoked that field in 2016, including people like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Rand Paul, et cetera, because the GOP base was fed up. And and they were sick of the neocon warmongering, quote unquote free market economic policies that actually is just treating America as like a tax farm for the global empire.
Right.
And so that's just where I've been personally. Like I am a national populist, and Trump, I think in many ways is a national populist too. And so, and all this time though, you asked me like, how does this relate to my faith? So I was at Capitol Baptist Church. So I was plugged into a really good church. That was really important to me. But I actually moved to DC, not for politics, but for the church. Built my life around the church, got married in that church, had small groups there, lived 2 blocks from the church. And so by God's grace, I was able to really, build my life around a local church and work in national politics at the same time. Although I will say this, Tim, I was an outlier, particularly my support for Trump in 2016 at Capitol
Hill. Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would fault me for saying that because it's just the truth. That strain of evangelicalism didn't get Trump, but somehow I do. Right. And so that was interesting. And that sort of helped me realize, okay, some of the problems we have in the GOP, they don't represent their base. They work against their interests, transfers over to the evangelical world too, where we have sort of high level leadership that doesn't represent a lot of the interests of the evangelical base, particularly on political things. I will say that God was gracious to me to allow me to be a witness in all of my offices. I think in literally every single office I worked in, by God's grace, I was able to bring a non-Christian coworker to service at Capitol Baptist Church. I invited them. I did lots of evangelistic Bible studies with folks, reading the Gospel of Mark, having coffee. And so it was a great witnessing field, if that's the right term. Which is interesting since I left DC and went to seminary for a couple of years. And now I'm back in North Carolina, living on campus at seminary and now kind of working. Now I work from home. I do miss the evangelistic opportunities that present themselves in a non-Christian workforce. So if you're listening to this and you're a Christian and you are still in the office and there's lots of non-Christians around you, brother, that is your mission field. Make friends, do evangelistic Bible studies, invite them to church. Because if you get out of that field, you got to work harder to make those opportunities for yourself. Anyway, worked for Trump, and it was great. And then went to seminary, and I'll wrap it up there if you want me to talk about anything else.
No, that was good. That's a really good background. And just a couple things. I'm old enough to where I remember when the stalwart GOP were Jack Kemp and that generation, what you thought of. And, I subscribed to American Spectator. I would watch The Firing Line with William Buckley. Yeah. And, it was all part of that. I was just a young Christian at the time. And there's a couple of red pill moments for me. No question about it. And God used a dear friend of mine to kind of wake me up to that. You got to look at this from another perspective, from true conservatism, from the true roots of, going back to even questioning what we did during and after World War II. But all that to say, that's okay. Back to Jesus in politics. I thought it was interesting how in 17, when I came here to Syracuse Baptist Church from a comfortable church I planted and could have retired in, and came into the SBC. Mm-hmm. So immediately I'm going for the sharpest knives in the Baptist drawer. One of them was Mark Dever. I listened to those pastor talks. Like, I downloaded all the past episodes. I'm kind of prepping myself for coming into a different church environment. I'm going to be the only pastor at this point. It's a small little country. And if people want to see that story, go to Reforming Grandma's Church on YouTube, where Jason and I discuss our relative successes and non-successes there. So it did come as a bit of a surprise to me when I heard them not just dissing Trump. I understand, because they're thinking, oh, he's just a populist. He's just out rabble rouser, crazy, brash New Yorker guy. Because by that time I had red pilled on free trade, immigration, all that stuff for years. I was already like, no. It's not about having a Thai restaurant in your neighborhood. It's about, like you said, construction businesses being undercut by cheap labor, factories being undercut, and this kind of globalist economy, which it's not good for the individual nations. And so it was a disappointing surprise to me, especially then after 2020. And we ended up pulling our church from the 9 Marks listing. I just couldn't be associated with that anymore, because I thought it was kind of they're attempting this via media middle way of politics, where you can have, and let's face it, there's a whole bunch of single women who work for the Democrats in the congregation of Capitol Hill Baptist. So you got to keep the butts in the pews. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Tim. I mean, I will. I'll do a little bit of a defense of 9 Marks, or
do it.
And look, I love Mark Dever as a friend, as a spiritual father in the faith, and I completely believe in the ecclesiological vision that 9 Marks puts forward, the historic Baptist polity. Yep. And I think that has been an incredibly useful effort to recover that, because that was really lost, honestly, through the 20th century. Yeah. A lot of the Billy Graham changes to American evangelicalism and the loss of the importance of church membership. So I love that stuff. It's great. It's great material. And, it's interesting how in a highly politicized age, which is what we live in, politics is increasingly somewhat of a litmus test, even that overrides some other things. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind, because there's vibes and associations and things like that. And so and I think 9 Marks is doing this more now, which is just focusing on the ecclesiology, and if that's what they're going to do, that's what they should do. I don't think that they should try to moonlight as political theologists. That's not fundamentally their mission. And when you do that, particularly if you do it in any way that's sort of more winsome to the left than to the right, you do risk alienating some people. So, I mean, I feel you on that. I definitely voiced a lot of my disagreements while I was there about some of those directions. And you're right, the congregation, if you're in an urban setting, I mean, that's the thing too, is I think that like urban settings are by nature liberalizing. Albert Mohler has a great little riff on this, the 3 C's. The closer you are to a coast, the closer you are to a city, the closer you are to a college campus, the more liberal your population is going to be. And so I think that one of the big questions for faithful church planters and pastors in 21st century American urban settings is, are you going to stand on the full counsel of God's word, even if it offends the liberal sensibilities of the people who may be attracted to your church? I mean, even yesterday we saw Ed Stetzer quoting J.D. Greear, with Greear saying, I'm in a more liberal area, and so I have to be careful how I speak so I don't offend half the people showing up. And I think that is garbage. That is
on the basis of evangelizing the people that are coming to your church.
Right. Which, I mean, it's like,
there's your ecclesiology right there.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you looking at the Lord's Day worship as an evangelist? This is discipling time. You're supposed to be training God's people. I mean, I'm right in the middle of a series on the law of God. And, you know, how many applications of the 5th commandment can we make? Well, this coming Sunday is the sermon everyone's been waiting on, which is the what about the whatabouts? You know, honor life, you know, and honoring those your superiors in the family, the church, and even the civil sphere. And everyone's like, well, what about this? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get to that, but we got to get first principles right first. Yeah. And you can imagine what threw me in 2020. You know, first. They're basically they're all in line with the we'll call them mandates, because if you didn't do it, you got in trouble. So come on. Second, Lehman marches in a BLM parade, which was apparently not covered under that first part. And then third, within microseconds of hearing about MacArthur's decision to reopen, he fires off, you know, what was it, 4 pages of this is why this bad look, bad optics. And I'm like, oh, so you can respond very quickly to things you don't agree with. Sure. I just thought it was unequal weights, and I'd had it. You know, we're still sticking with SBC and founders. I know SBC. By the way, speaking of SBC, you're a Southern Baptist.
I am.
Yes, indeed.
Have been for 13 years.
I'd rather fight than switch.
Right.
That's the old ad. Let's talk a little bit about how these political theologians have kind of flip-flopped in our own institutions and have been exposed recently by this little book by a woman named Megan Basham. How in the world did she become the lightning rod for all of these parachurch, church leaders, woke DEI people just coming unglued?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fantastic book. Tim, I think I can say this here. I'm not sure when this is airing, but soon. The Center for Baptist Leadership, the organization that I founded and run, which is committed to cultivating courageous and uncompromising Baptist leadership for the 21st century, has been blessed by one of our major supporters to be able to provide 500 copies of Megan Basham's book in a giveaway.
Wow.
We should be announcing this by the time this video is out. It should have been announced, I hope. If you are a Southern Baptist pastor, deacon, lay leader, or an SBC seminary student, you get first dibs. We want to get them in the hands of Southern Baptists because this is such a critical book. And you're right, Tim. I mean, it's generated a lot of controversy, a lot of interest. I mean, I think, I don't know this for sure, but I bet the total sales numbers are close to 50,000 by now. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Which that's huge. I mean, I've seen some sale numbers for some other books at like Big Eva books, Crossway books that have like the approvals from everybody. And they're in like the 3,000s, the 5,000s.
Yeah.
And so Megan has New York Times bestseller. And here's why, because people want to understand what has happened to evangelicalism over the last 10 to 15 years. And how is it that, whichever way you turn, whether it's in the Southern Baptist Convention or the PCA, or even at some of these parachurch organizations, or they're posturing through Black Lives Matter, COVID, and the 2016 and 2020 elections, just seems so liberal, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And what Megan does in this book is she tries to help explain that for your average individual. Some of it is directly financially related. She finds the financial receipts, and she shows that the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention has been taking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from very anti-Christian progressive organizations. Now, they say they're for things like promoting faith and democracy. But why would an organization that supports abortion, the transgender agenda, the LGBT agenda, the radical climate change agenda, be giving money to a Christian organization for things like this, unless they thought that somehow it moved the Christian voting bloc in their direction, which Megan shows in that book was the explicit goal of some of these groups. Maybe not all of them written down. I would assume it's all of them up here, but some of them, one of the Soros groups said, one of our biggest obstacles to implementing our policy agenda in the United States of America is evangelical Christians.
Yeah.
And so what happened, Megan spells this out, which is really interesting, Tim, is that, say from like the 1950s to, the early 2000s, particularly the moral majority era, progressive fought the Christians like this head on. We'll try to demonize you guys in the public. And then
it didn't work.
About 20-ish years ago, they switched from direct confrontation to co-opting us.
Right.
And it's the co-opting that's had the more bang for the buck. And so, that book talks about, the climate change agenda, critical race theory. If you're listening to this and you're a Southern Baptist, well, if you need the book for free, sign up for it and get it from us.
We'll put the link in the description below for sure.
If you already have it, chapter 7, particularly on the Me Too in the church, chapter 7, and what happened in the Southern Baptist Convention is so eye-opening. It's an absolute must-read part of the book. And What is fascinating, Tim, is it just shows how the big cultural movements, again, Black Lives Matter, critical race theory. So you've got the sort of race Marxism bucket. Mm-hmm. Then, COVID, which was just sort of like a globalist power grab bucket. And then the Me Too movement, which was sort of a feminist, improper understanding of sexual dynamics, power bucket,
egalitarian bucket. Yeah.
Egalitarian bucket. All those plays that they ran on the culture, they ran them in the church too. And they had a lot of allies in doing it. And Megan names names, and that's why people are upset. He
named names. Paul named names.
Paul named a lot of names.
Yeah, Paul could have said, well, there's this metal worker. I don't want to go into any details. No, he says, beware of Alexander, right? Because he's an enemy of the faith. I think, given the response, the reception of the book positively from people saying, you got to get this, got to read this. And then seeing how the left, and I'll say the left because, Neil Shenvi, he was supposedly on our side because he wrote a book critical of CRT. Remember, he began that book with acknowledging all of CRT's points in a way, right? So I have to wonder, why are they so focused on particular details and refusing to allow Megan to do what any journalist would do, and that's to summarize the position of the person she's talking about?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. I mean, that would define journalism out of existence forever. Some people would say it's a good thing, but no, you can be responsible. It's like Megan has been. And I think with the receipts, they need to stop trying to make this about the teeny little details and say, all right, is it true that these organizations have attempted to co-opt? And is it true that some of the men and women within these organizations have allowed the co-op? That's really the question.
Right. And this also gets into just how Marxist coded speech and political action works, which is they never say exactly what they mean, right? And so you have to parse it. I mean, it's a battle for the dictionary. So when J.D. Greear says, that the church has not done a good job responding to homosexuals, what does that mean? What does he mean by that? And we're actually going to be running a multi-part article from Chris Bolt, excellent thinker. He's at the Village Church, Virginia, Richmond, Virginia area, Southern Baptist, responding to a blog post from J.D. Greear from 2019, where Greear talks about homosexuality. But that's another big bucket here, is the LGBT compromise. Is like, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that the church hasn't, quote unquote, done a good job dealing with homosexuality or responding to the LGBT community? By what standard? Right? Like, we're preaching the need for repentance. We're preaching the gospel. And unfortunately, what's happened, whether it's been J.D. Greear or somebody else who's very closely associated to him, this woman, Rachel Gilson, and others, Rebecca McLaughlin, I think is her last name, this Irish lady, there's been and Sam Alberry, Living Out Ministries. They're trying to, which those are all just a couple ticks better than like Revoice, which is totally off the deep end.
Right.
But all of it is this downplaying of the sin of homosexuality, which really I think is a cultural move. It's not a biblical move. But then, of course, J.D. Greear also says, well, homosexuality is a sin. Okay, so you're kind of doing two things here. We got to parse this out.
Both sides of his mouth.
Right. And so you have to interpret that. This gets back to as Megan's engaging these comments from guys, who do say some orthodox things, but then say some things that are clearly, I think, moving in a compromising direction, if not compromising themselves in the moment. You have to parse that out. And they can try to hide behind, I'm an inerrantist, or, I'm a conservative evangelical. But the reality is your words mean something. Your rhetoric does mean something. And it's appropriate to call you out on that, even if you're willing to sign a piece of paper saying you think homosexuality is a sin. Right.
And if you do that, it's kind of like what in the SBC, the guy, I support the BF&M. Okay, great. Fine. But then how does that explain, and how is that in concord with what you said over here? Right. So I think unless these guys are willing to come out and say, when I spoke at that point, and I tell you what, give you an example of that was Willie Rice.
Yes.
And he's caught flack for his repentance over what he said at the 2021 convention.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing right now, there's and he goes on and, being a jerk, and it's the kind of jamming that we know what it was, man. I'm telling you what, William, honestly, I was out back behind my house getting my 2024-25 firewood supply all ready to go, sweating in the middle of summer, listening to him on, I can't remember what podcast it was. And I'm weeping. I'm going, God, if only men would be men and say what they mean and mean what they say, like this guy's doing.
Was it not my podcast?
Maybe. Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Glory be. Yeah, it was on yours. It was. Yes. Okay. Well, hey, a lot of podcasts under the bridge by then.
Well, I can understand when you got Willie on telling his story, I become incredibly forgettable in that moment. But no, I mean, that was such a wonderful, that's why the Center for Baptist Leadership exists. Now, I've tried to make it clear to people, stories like Willie's are like a needle in a haystack, right?
Yes.
I'm not going to be able to knock it out of the park every podcast episode with something like that. But stories like Willie's inspire other people to be brave and do the right thing. And the way that he had his eyes opened on the race issues, on the Me Too and the SBC and how we were getting played. He had that line where he said, after I got run over by the bus, I was surprised to see who was driving it, because driving it were the people that he thought he was working with. And another thing that really stuck out in his story was how the way that Vodi Bakum got treated when Vodi was potentially going to run for SBC president. He just couldn't believe how the others, his side at that point in time, was talking about Vodi. And so, Willie is a warrior. I'm glad he's on our side now.
Yeah.
I saw
Willie, if you're watching, I want to say, I apologize for some of the things I thought about you. after the convention. And man, I tell you what, you serve as an example to people who have had to change their mind about something and have come clean about it. That's what I was kind of getting at. If these guys would come clean and say, you know what I said about COVID and the government's overreach and all of those things, how I critiqued John MacArthur and unduly, I fully repent, right? Then we could move on, but we can't move on while they keep circling the wagons around the institutions. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, or around their personal brands, right? And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like JD Greer had a long response to Megan. And look, JD has sort of walked back some of his like worst comments, like his pronoun hospitality thing. You know, he kind of walked that back. But it was interesting. I was looking at his walk back, and his walk back was really even like not fully like an apology, like not saying this is wrong, just saying like, well, you know, it's contextual and maybe I wouldn't now, but, you know, you could potentially. And he used Preston Sprinkle. He got that from Preston Sprinkle, who's an absolute disaster. Preston Sprinkle is not biblical on issues of human sexuality, on questions of transgenderism, homosexual attraction, you know, things like that. And so, I don't think I've seen a single guy who's been sort of outed in Shepherds for Sale like actually say, yeah, I got it wrong. And, you know, Tim, honestly, like, I don't see how they, like a lot of these guys, like, I don't see how they ever do say like, we were wrong on COVID. We were wrong on critical race theory, because to do that is going to be sort of like class betrayal for the big Eva folks. I mean, I'd love to see it. I could be wrong. The Lord can do amazing things, you know? But you're right. Instead of repentance and clarification, we've gotten more obfuscation and excuses from the people in Shepherds for Sale.
And a kind of doubling down. Again, I've seen it. And you mentioned way early in the interview about the parallel between how political parties gaslight, don't represent their base. Well, the same thing in the SBC. You know, clearly there was some hostility towards Brent Leatherwood and the ERLC, especially given what happened after the conference or the convention, when he wasn't, and then he was, and somebody else got canned. Pure politics. This is purely protecting whatever it is that you're trying to protect there in the ERLC. What do you think the biggest I guess, result of Megan's book will be? Let's prognosticate 6 months, a year out. You know, instead of prognosticating about what might have happened 1,000 years ago if the Crusades weren't fought. Okay, kidding. What do you think is going to be the benefit of this book and the results of it? Do you think we're going to see some sea change institutionally?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. I think it's still a little bit too early to tell. I mean, I will say one thing that I think I know will be an outcome of Megan's book is that the people in the pews will be better equipped to spot the subversion earlier on. Right. So it's like this subversion works its way in, the co-opting is happening. And I think that a book like Shepherds for Sale gives a lot of your average Christians who aren't pastors, right, but just faithful church members, they now have a lot of frames of reference for spotting, you know, subversive rhetoric that comes from the left on issues that are pertaining to race relations, climate change, politics in America, you know, things like that. And a lot of them are political, right? And so I think that this equips the people in the pews to hold their leadership accountable. I think that's a definite impact. One thing that I'm concerned about as an impact is that the guys who are in leadership positions in Big Eva will be just sneakier, right? Though they've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. They want to go back to the cookie jar. Now they're just going to try to tiptoe a little bit quieter, put the lid back on a little bit quieter, you know, turn the camera
won't make that mistake again.
Right. And so, you know, I think that constant vigilance is something also that like we should take as a lesson from this, is that we need to be, you know, paying closer attention and looking at things like financial statements, 990s, you know, these are things that people can do. You can go find them online. And so I think that that's one of the things, but I do think actually, as it pertains to the Southern Baptist Convention, I think we are building significant momentum for securing maybe one of our first like major wins of institutional reform at an entity, and that is the ERLC. I think that Megan's book has dealt a pretty serious blow to the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission as it's been led under Russell Moore and Brent Leatherwood. We're talking about like almost 10 years now of their combined leadership. And the Southern Baptist rank and file are fed up with it, right? So we had our lunch at the Center for Baptist Leadership. I think you were there, great event.
Oh, I know I was there. I got to lead the doxology at the end.
That's right. Yeah. And so, I think, and then from that, Tom Askell, had the motion to take the first step to get rid of the ERLC.
Yeah.
Didn't pass, but it got a big vote.
Yeah.
And so I think that you could say the brainworm has been planted. And then and then following that, you had the total disaster of Brent Leatherwood's statements on a variety of different things. And then the way he praised Biden using essentially Democrat talking points.
What a selfless act. What a statesman.
Biden doesn't even know what state he's in, much less
statesman. Right.
But yeah, and so I think right now, so the ERLC actually has a trustee meeting September 11th, and so we will see what comes out of that. But I think that I do believe that as we move towards Dallas, as Southern Baptist pastors and people that aren't just in the the quote unquote rabble rouser crowd, there's this guy, Ben Wright in Texas, who, Ben doesn't honestly even really like me. I don't know why. Ben doesn't like me. Right. But Ben also doesn't like the ERLC. He wrote an article in sort of the squishy Baptist outlet, the Baptist Review, saying either the ERLC needs new leadership or Brent needs to be seriously constrained. It was a very good article. I highly commend it. And so like if people like Ben Wright and William Wolfe and everybody in between are saying the ERLC, something needs to change here because it's been such a vector for progressive subversion. I do think, Tim, whether it's in the next few months or whether it's when we get to Dallas, for SBC 25 or shortly thereafter, I think we are going to see some major changes at the ERLC. And I think we can credit Megan's book for that a lot.
Yeah.
So those are kind of my hopes for it,
Well, that's fair. That's a good prognostication. We don't, no one knows how some of these things affect which is again, part of her point. It's not the direct funneling there, but it's how the influencers keep threading out throughout congregations and leadership. And they begin to think in these terms. And I think the worst, the best spin is that they've been influenced by philosophies that aren't based in Christ. And then go to Colossians 2 and say, don't be captive by those things. So yeah, it was nice to meet Megan, and she's just a regular gal, just trying to do her job. And all of a sudden everybody comes out for Knives Out, man. Oh, that was great. And she's always, she's a good journalist. Which brings me to something I know we didn't talk about earlier, but I think in these kind of discussions, especially where we're talking about biblical political theology, I personally blame the public education system. They succeeded because now people can't think in categories. They get tripped up by red herrings, by hyperbole, by straw men, and they emote. I mean, my wife put it so well the other night. I was watching something and she's like, well, they're not thinking. This is pure emotionalism. Yeah, so exactly. So when I hear stuff, let's say the group Evangelicals for Harris, first of all, I don't think they're really evangelicals. And second, I don't think they're actually for Harris, because what's there to be for? She's the empty wine mom pantsuit of the country right now.
They're for joy, Tim. It's joy.
It's joy, right? It's pure joy.
They're envisioning what can be, unburdened by what has been.
Right, and I'm like, well, that was nice. Turn the lights out when you leave. There's nothing. There's literally vacuous nothing there. Plus, don't underestimate the Marxian language of the future.
Oh yeah,
because it's all going to work out in the future. By the way, it's never been tried. the entire bloody, how many 100 million people killed at the hands of their own government. No. They didn't employ it correctly. Remember, It was never actually tried. What nonsense. I'm still looking for the omelet that those broken eggs were supposed to make. But so in the churches, I have a neighbor who I get together with regularly. He's a good friend, not on the same page on some theological things. He's not reformed like I am. And it's a big church, but we love getting together. He's a godly man. And I posited to him once, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I said, if every Bible believing church in this area would take one Sunday, right? Just one Sunday to put the issues out biblically and logically and connect the dots back to the lordship of Christ. I said, don't you think? And he goes, I'm going to stop you right there. That'll never happen. Not here, right? Not with the rank and file Bible believing, because I don't know. People don't think straight. And you said recently in a post, because you didn't ask the question I wanted you to, your question is dumb. And part of that was, I'm describing a reality. I'm not saying this is how things are supposed to be. In a sense, that is a little bit Machiavellian. Remember the prince, he's just saying, well, this is how it is. He's always going to protect his own interest. This is life, right?
Right.
And you ended that with, but describing a reality is not an endorsement of it, but these guys can't think.
Right.
You don't, by that, you don't mean that they're like IQ 70 and dumb. I think you mean something different.
Oh yeah. Well, that was just last night, Tim, from
okay.
we were recording this. I mean, so this gets into the, we can, I don't know which direction you want to take this, but this gets into the debate over the abortion abolitionist position vis-a-vis Trump, the Trump campaign versus Kamala. One thing I did want to say, because you did mention the communism, it's very important though. Like, I think that, one of the major failures, of course, of the public education system in America over the last many decades, but frankly of the church in the post-Cold War era, has been to really educate Christians about the horrors of communism and what actually was wrought anywhere in the 20th century that communism was seriously implemented, whether that was in China or in Russia or in Cambodia or elsewhere. And Cuba, Venezuela, et cetera.
Korea.
And instead, North Korea, what's happened, and I think this has been very intentional, is that the left has taken Nazis and Nazism and fascism, and they've elevated it to boogeyman number one. Yeah. And of course, I'm not downplaying, the horrors of what happened under Hitler in any way, but the honest assessment in terms of the damage of the lives lost and the families destroyed and the countries ruined, communism is a way heavy hitter in the 20th century compared to Hitler and Nazism. But for the left, because they actually embrace communistic ideology, I think they very intentionally have downplayed the threat and the deadly nature of communism, upplayed Nazism, which has no hold anywhere, right? There's no threat of Nazism or fascism in any real way. And the church is complicit in that. And so I'm tying this all back into, the abortion Holocaust in America is a major point and a major concern. But we've lost 70 million babies potentially to abortion since Roe v. Wade, and yet also fighting to stop communism taking root in America is a very serious concern. It's a pro-life concern when we think of all the lives that were lost in communism, potentially 100 million. And so, and another thing I'd throw in there too is avoiding a nuclear holocaust is a issue too. And so, we have to consider all of these issues sort of in a spectrum and in a context and weight them appropriately. And my point there is that I think even the abortion abolitionists and even the general pro-life movement in America have a little bit of a stunted historical view of the other grave evils that have been perpetrated by other wicked political systems in the very recent past and could very well come back to life if we blow on those embers strong enough in America, and so We just have to, voting against communism is a very Christian thing to do. I said this a while back on X, and I got a lot of flack for it. It's funny. It's one of those things that made it into some leftist organizations. Even Tim Alberta, his book, The Kingdom and the Power and Glory.
Yeah.
I said this: if it was good and right and just for Christians to oppose communistic regimes, like in the Soviet Union, when they were implemented, as they were being implemented, it's good and right and just for Christians to fight against them now, which is very much something I think Christians need to hear. Like evangelicals for Harris is essentially just like Christians for communism. Mm-hmm. And that is fundamentally an oxymoron.
Right. Well, their justification is, hey, the Good Samaritan, and we want to help everybody. And they're the same talking points you hear from the Young Turks, you hear from Vox, you hear from all these different organizations that are pushing collectivism. Recently, local debate over the election, and I basically said, you're misinformed. The National Socialists and Stalin were two sides of the same coin. It's a statist coin. They want something other than God to be at the head of everything. Sure. And as Schaefer said, if it's the state, if it's not God, it's going to be the state.
Right.
And even a anarchist wants his trash taken out every Tuesday morning. There's going to be a level of, okay, I draw the line in the sand there. Let's fast forward now to some of the reasons that people are giving for saying, okay, I'm just going to sit this one out. Given what you just said about voting against communism, why is it at this point, do you think, that the Trump campaign seems to be trying to court the vote of those who are more pro-choice on abortion? Is it pragmatism?
Man, that's a huge question, Tim. And some of this.
Sorry to spring it on you.
No, well, so look, I got a couple of things that I think, and some of them are not like I can't quantify them with hard data, right? It's just like my analysis. So Trump runs in 2016 and he blows through the primary field. It's not even close. Cruz got the closest to him and it wasn't even close. Yeah. He essentially has like a mandate from heaven to remake the Republican Party in his image, because he trounces like the most stacked primary field that we've seen in recent Republican history. And evangelicals proceed to crap all over Donald Trump for the next like many months of his campaign. I know that, the numbers like 83% of white evangelicals did end up voting for Trump.
Right.
And I think that's true. But I do think that the people who put Trump over the finish line in the states that won him the election in 2016, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in particular, are not the evangelical base. I really don't think that.
Right.
I think that is the blue collar Obama, Trump, maybe union, maybe factory worker. Those people, the main issues that they care about are the ones we started this podcast talking about: trade, immigration, economics. And maybe some of those people are pro-life. Maybe some of them aren't. And this is something too that, like, again, this is just describing a reality. It's not an endorsement of it.
Yep.
That's lower income, lower class Americans who maybe are more conservative on some of these other issues. They actually, due to their socioeconomic circumstances, probably intuitively, though wrongly, think access to abortion is an important thing. Right. Because like, they're like, I'm a single dad with like a daughter and maybe other kids, or like it's a broken marriage, like if our 15-year-old gets pregnant, we can't afford to care for the child. Like
the girl that spoke at the DNC, I was a victim, 12 years old. And you're thinking, okay, but again, blame public education. We know that that's 0.0% of abortions. They're elective. They're purely selective.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm not talking. Sorry, I wasn't talking about like instances of rape there. I'm just talking about instances. Right.
Well, it's the exception to the rule clause that makes the law, which always makes bad law. Yeah. That's what I was getting.
My point there is that actually I think probably blue collar Rust Belt or Midwest workers and Trump voters actually they are not your people picketing picketing abortion mills. They're not the folks coming to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. They probably are more pro-choice voters. I'm just stating that as reality because of their class and their situation. And those are people that broke for Trump. So I think Trump does want to continue to appeal to that block. And I think it's unfortunate. I think he managed to do it in 2016 without talking the way that he's been talking. But then what happened? Well, he said, I'm going to overturn Roe. And then he did it. And then we had that happened after he was out of office. But then, he says now, I think essentially Trump did in his mind everything that the major pro-life organizations asked him to do.
Right.
And that's all he really wanted to do with it. I mean, this is another thing too, Tim, is that since Donald Trump came down that golden escalator in 2015, I think I've had an understanding of who he is. He is essentially like a 1990s conservative-ish Democrat. And I have never thought that Trump would be some sort of social conservative champion.
Right.
I've had that baked into the equation since day one. And yet even yesterday, people are like, oh my goodness, Trump is not like my leading social conservative warrior. It's like, what are you talking about?
He never was.
He never was. And yet, even though he wasn't, he still delivered for us in a way that all of our stalwarts never managed to do.
Somehow he accomplished more as being who he is than Reagan, Bush the second, on and on and on.
Yes. And so on that point too, which is in the first Trump administration, we say actions speak louder than words. Okay. So I think that's still true. There's a ton of rhetoric flying around right now in a campaign season. It is what it is. Some of it will be better than some rhetoric is better than other rhetoric. Some certainly worse. But in the first Trump term, at every agency, serious pro-life policies were implemented where they could be and as appropriate. The State Department with what's called the Mexico City policy, ending federal funds for abortion clinics overseas. At HHS, under the leadership of people like this guy named Roger Severino, who's now at Heritage. I mean, they turned off all the funding faucets that would flow to a Planned Parenthood or things like that. And I mean, they pushed it. And then at the Department of Justice, you had the Department of Justice siding with people who were seeking religious exemptions on mandates, contraceptive mandate, things like that, siding with pro-lifers, with their being unjustly persecuted. And so HHS, state, DOJ, others were all doing what you can do at the federal level to push a pro-life agenda. And that's another thing too, Tim, I could hammer into people is that you don't understand what the presidency is. The presidency is the chief executive officer of the United States of America, who is supposed to have control over the executive branch, right? And he can issue executive orders. He can set policy. He can appoint personnel. He cannot wave a magic wand and make a state do something, right? And even this is on the COVID things too. I do not think the federal recommendations on COVID were good. I recognize those happened under Trump, but we had a cadre of really bad actors, Fauci, Collins, et cetera. It's like the fog of war, But even then, those were not technically mandates. They were just suggestions.
Right.
Each state could implement what they wanted, and some states did better than others. And so people seem to think people are like, oh, Trump would be bad for the pro-life movement. Well, for 4 years, he certainly wasn't. Right. And
as a result of his SCOTUS appointee, 2022 happened.
Right.
Praise God.
Which is, this is funny, Tim. This is where the abortion abolitionists, they say that the Dobbs decision was an iniquitous decree. They say it's not good. And I can't join them on that. I guess what they wanted instead of Dobbs was the federal ruling that abortion, the Supreme Court ruling that abortion cannot be legal anywhere. Now, I want that too. Yeah, I want that too. We certainly didn't have the justices for that. But I don't think that undoing Roe was a bad thing. I think that was a good thing. I will say, though, that it's been staggering. I once called it an abortion apocalypse. And what I mean by that is an unveiling. We removed Roe, and now we get to see where people really stand on this issue.
That's right. That's
And
right.
in all 7 states where there's been a ballot referendum on either moving the ball in a better pro-life direction or moving it in a pro-abortion direction, either way, we've lost all of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You just wrote, I think it was yesterday, again, telling it like it is.
Right.
You got to tell it like it is. We're 0 for 7 on ballot referendums against. Yep. Massive support for IVF in most churches. Pro-Life Inc. is compromising.
Yep.
Abolitionists haven't successful passed a single state level piece. That is just how it is. And yep. Again, you know me, my affinity is a civil magistrate needs to obey the law of God. If I were president, that would be the best 3 hours of everyone's life, right? I mean, it wouldn't. No. But tying this together with how Christians are to view their vote, we are not voting for a pastor of the United States. You have to think beyond. I think at this point, I may be crazy. I think there's with RFK's endorsement, Tulsi Gabbard's endorsement, and a number of other ones coming in, it really seems like this is a Republican-Democrat coalition against communism.
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable?
No, it is. And so, okay. So I kind of was just maybe a little bit all over the place there, but you're essentially asking why is Trump talking the way he's talking? So the one point I was trying to make is that, if I am the Trump campaign and I'm Trump, I'm saying, what have these pro-lifers ever done for me? They all sat out. They didn't vote for me in 2016.
Yep.
2020, asterisk over that one. I overturned my appointees overturned Roe, and then they fumble it in the states everywhere.
Right.
And then, this was fascinating, Tim. I heard this from a DC insider recently said this to me, a great guy. He said, how can you expect Trump to not say he thinks 6 weeks is too short when the Susan B. Anthony list, one of the biggest pro-life advocacy organizations, has been saying 15 weeks? Yeah. In Trump's year over and over and over again. They've been saying 15 weeks, 15 weeks, yep. 15 weeks. So Trump has been literally discipled, Tim, by big pro-life Inc., into adopting, positions and trying to repeat the talking points on an issue that I think honestly is not one of Trump's major issues. I think it should be. Again, so it's this is the question between, we're talking about the political reality versus what the ideal is versus what God calls things to be. Right? I think Trump will answer to the Lord for failing to defend life the way that he should. Good. I think that is true. Yeah. And if I was a pastor preaching to Trump, I would say you are not doing what God has called you to do, even in your rhetoric, But that's one thing. But then recognizing the situation and the compromise of the pro-life movement. I mean, again, my point there is we've got so much work to do. We need to do this work. We need to get organized. We need to recognize that Trump is essentially parroting pro-life Inc. talking points. And frankly, when it comes down to that voting booth in November 5, you have Trump or you have Kamala, and I don't think voting is a sacrament.
It's a tool.
It's a tool. And you know what? Maybe God will hold me accountable for my Trump vote. I'm sure he will one way or another. I know he will. Maybe it may, but I am not going to try to over spiritualize it. Right. And I'm going to vote to try to buy us essentially more time to keep fighting on these issues that I think that we can fight on. You can't abolish abortion in America if you're in jail.
I was thinking using the word gulag in my head, but it's exactly. So, tying this up, the purpose of the Jesus in Politics conference is frankly to help Christians navigate these waters and to think clearly, to think biblically, with the lordship of Christ as paramount over every other decision you make. Even what you eat and drink, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. It's that mundane. So if it's that there, how much more on these big issues? Again, I want to say I really appreciate what you've been able to do with the Center for Baptist Leadership in such a short amount of time. Let's keep that going. All right. Let's keep promoting that. You see a link to that down below. Also, thanks for having me lead the doxology. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, Tim, it's like the God is king, Christ is king, and the nations are bound to serve him, and our political rulers are responsible to serve him.
Yes.
And then in this period in history that we live in America, we have the opportunity to, wield a vote, right? And that's an important thing to steward. Voting is a stewardship, right? And we want to do it as best as we can. And I think we do need to give space to, obviously to brothers and sisters who have different opinions within a certain realm of reason, right? Like I've never said, I think you should vote for Trump. I'm voting for Trump. If you can't vote for Trump, I'm not going to anathemize you, right? I don't think you can faithfully vote for Harris. And I will say this is back to one last thing of trying to think clearly about Jesus over politics is, are you saying if you are a single issue pro-life voter or an abortion abolitionist, are you saying that Christian faithfulness means that you have no meaningful say in the political process in a democratic republic unless until there's a party that has enough weight that you can align yourself with? Because they actually need to answer that question. Now, you could answer that question differently, but if you're saying, I won't ever vote for anybody who doesn't have this position on the pro-life issue, then you're saying my vote will have no impact until we get that party. Right. And so I think you just need to think clearly through that. And I'm not sure that is the only way to be a faithful Christian voter today.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. We for years we've talked about ideologues placing their ideologies above humanity. I mean, that's Paul Johnson's book, Intellectuals. That's the whole point of it. Our ideas this works on paper, Stalin said in 1932. So it's going to work on the farms in Ukraine, and everybody starved. Pure ideology, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we can make a similar, albeit better motivated, but it's still you're still sacrificing reality for your ideology, even if it's good. Look, I've got a church full. If everyone's there, it's about 140 now. We have no room. In fact, if you're thinking about visiting, don't. We're packed, so go somewhere else. When have you heard that? Yeah. We got a church full of homeschoolers, post-millennial, theonomic abolitionists, right? But they understand that the vote is a tool. And this side of the eternal state, even in a post-millennial optimistic worldview, there's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be battles, and it's never going to be perfect until the perfect comes. Mm-hmm. So steward your vote. William, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Appreciate the work you're doing, man. Keep it up. Appreciate your steadiness on X. Thank God for Elon Musk. Can we say that?
Yeah.
Hasn't that been a good thing?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I know you're trying to wrap this up, but
hey, no. I'm
two other things. I wanted to. One is that we can talk about communism as like an ideology or historical event and occurrence, but we have to recognize how the age of big tech is playing into this, and the way that there are censorship tools available to dangerous statist governments and even sub entities within the government that are at levels that Joseph Stalin could only dream of with the KGB.
The Stasi would have gone crazy over the tools we have today.
Right. And so that's a couple of other things to keep in mind here is like, do you abortion abolitionists want the ability to get your message out through the mediums that are now our public communication mediums like X or Facebook or YouTube or whatever? Because look at what Zuckerberg said, right? Zuckerberg says, they asked me to censor and I censored. And I think actually, I will say, I think Zuckerberg was sending a message to the Biden-Harris administration that maybe he's not going to do it.
That's right. I agree.
Who knows? Maybe not. But my point there is that like if we have Harris, it's not just that she's demonstrably worse on pro-life issues. Of course she is.
Yeah.
And it's not that she's just demonstrably worse on the border and economics and LGBT and trans and all that stuff. It's that her administration will work hand in glove in coercing every free speech platform available. And if we get Harris walls, like, they will try to put Elon Musk in jail. I mean, and if you think you think that sounds crazy, consider the fact they're trying to put Donald Trump in jail right now. The American regime, which is the conglomeration of our national security agencies and entities, the executive branch of the federal government, the DOJ, and then big tech, and then the journalists who are in bed with him, they are in overdrive right now to silence and suppress the views and the ability of people like us, conservative Christians, patriots, biology respecters. There's so much on the line here that I think, you got to pull this back out and realize you said it's Democrats and liberals versus communists. And look, I don't love that. I really don't. I don't like how the Republican Party, as it currently is constituted under Trump, has really sent social conservatives to the back of the bus. I've argued that social conservatives were kind of on the back of the bus under the neocons anyway. It was just maybe less explicit. But that bus is the only viable option we have right now. It's like speed, right? I'd rather be on the bus and have a chance to take it over than to be on the trains going to the gulags.
Right.
And so I just wanted, you brought up Musk, but I wanted to weave a couple other things into whoever else listens to this as we just think more comprehensively about what's on the line here in this election. And it's freedom of religion, it's freedom of speech, it's the existence of the American nation. Right. And of course, it's fighting to end abortion, and to defend our children from the radical LGBT, mind warpers. So it's like we've reached almost like it's not just like a single issue. It's like multiple single issues at critical mass. And we need wisdom for that. Yeah.
That's a good point. You need to, for those of my abolitionist friends, I would just say, take a couple steps back, look at where you are, steward your vote. Don't idealize it. Or ideologue it, whatever.
Idealize.
There it is.
Sacralize. Don't sacralize.
Sacralize your vote.
Don't do a sacralism.
Right. Yeah. So let's conclude this with a comprehensive opinion piece on the efficacy of the first, second, and third crusade. I'm kidding. We're not going there. So, hey, everyone who's watching, you want to hear some good speakers, eat some good pulled pork, and have some really good fellowship. That's why I really enjoyed that about the Jesus and Politics Conference. It's October 19th. It's on a Saturday. Very reasonable. We'll link the Eventbrite ticket link down below. Also, Center for Baptist Leadership. Support that if you can. Read their articles. Check out their media. William's doing a great job. And in conjunction with a number of other reforming groups within not only the Southern Baptist Convention, but in the church at large. Listen, we still have great opportunities to not just stem the tide of lunacy like we see coming out of the Harris-Walz campaign, but also the lunacy coming out of some of our institutions, and actually take these back for Jesus and have a church that is much more reflective of the goodness of God, God's law, families, and free markets. Let's face it.
Yeah, good. Rightly ordered free markets.
That's right. I'd rather not have a third party tell me what I can charge or how much I have to pay. That's Tim's simple, easy, Henry Hazlitt-less explanation. Anyway, well, thank you, William. Blessings on you and your household, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you so much for having me on. I look forward to seeing you in October. Folks, come to the conference. It's going to be fun.